Hi, this is Ben Bufana, and today I'm interviewing Michael. And Michael and I have known each other for how long?
Long.
Yeah, what,
Oh
eight
wow,
years?
15 years or something.
That,
Um, was it 2008 probably? So yeah, maybe something like almost 10 years, I guess.
okay, yeah. Well, anyway, you were referred to me by somebody that I worked with who lives in the Boston area. And
Yeah,
and we did some work for a while, but then you moved. You left New York. And
I did. Yeah,
yeah, and life took you to London, and you were um, you were working in theater there, right?
that's yeah right. I went to acting school out there in London.
Okay, and I don't remember exactly when you met, but you were in a pretty serious relationship for some time. You were actually living together, and
Yeah,
I think you were from when we spoke before. It sounded like you were pretty close at times. It was a pretty strong relationship. I think probably the most significant of your life to this date. Is that true?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that was very powerful.
Okay. But then there are a lot of challenges that, all relationships have challenges, and especially too when we're we have other things going on in life, in terms of um, our work and our professional life, when we're in school, financial challenges. I don't know exactly what all was going on with you, but there were some external factors from what I remember that were adding stress to the relationship, and the relationship ended up coming apart.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, there were a lot of reasons why it came apart.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, yeah, I mean, a lot of it was, a lot of uncertainty. Both of us didn't have really kind of our lives figured out. We didn't have, um, stable kind of careers and livelihoods really going for us, and there were just a lot of variables in both of our lives, and so that brought a lot of, uh, I guess, just I suppose a hindrance, and it had a kind of an air of whether or not the relationship was trying to we were trying to solve a lot of those problems, with the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but she was the one who really kind of saw that it wasn't really, that was the things that we needed to establish for ourselves independently, rather than trying to do it all together. And so, I guess from it being I don't know, maybe it's just youth, but you think that, those are all things that you can kind of do with through marriage, and some people do. I mean, I know that for me, I had thought that, getting married and, having the strength of the relationship um, would help us to um, find all those answers. Um,
Like things would work
she didn't.
themselves out as you went.
Right, yeah, yeah. But she didn't feel that
Yeah.
way. I think probably over time she started to feel she was a little a few years younger than me, but nevertheless, like more mature in some ways, in a lot of ways, and so so I didn't, I had a hard time coming to terms with that, and sort of wanting to see things my way, or believing, believing my that my I don't know, outlook would pull through. Um, and so there was a lot of resistance from my end, um, which was, unfortunate. But I wish I was a little bit more easier to kind of accept that what she wanted. But Yeah, and to answer your question though, there was like certainly a lot of um, unknowns that would made it harder for for the relationship to go on and continue. And, we always tried to make exceptions, but I think after a certain point in time, people just start to wonder, well, how many exceptions do I have to make,
Right.
to make things work out. So,
So she broke things off at one point, and then you sort of got back together. And
yeah, yeah. So maybe a few times.
times, okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we broke up quite a few times, but I would say maybe we had separated. I mean, we had met in London and then moved over to New York together and lived together in New York, and for about a year, and then um, she, well, we kind of felt like it wasn't really going places there for us, or I didn't want to really stick around, and so she tried a different city on her own, and so we were separated for a little while, and I decided that what I really wanted is to go back to spend more time in England when I had the chance to, and so we were apart for a few months. I can't remember how many, but she she then, uh, I guess for the sake of her wanting to give things a shot, she moved back to London uh, uh, to kind of appease me, and um, didn't take very long before she had broken up with me. I think the move had probably it was such a big sacrifice for her from what she felt was necessary for her to get kind of moving forward in her own life, that her expectations and demands of me and our relationship rose, a lot very quickly, which was hard for me to be understanding of or patient with, and put a lot of stress on the relationship for sure. And so she broke up with me probably maybe a month to 2 or 3 months after getting there. Didn't take very long, and um, yeah, there were a lot of factors that sort of influenced her feeling like it wasn't really what was sitting well for her personally, and so we separated for about, I don't know, maybe a summer while we were over there. We got back together for a real short time, and then when it came time to leave England, she ended our relationship just as we left. We had left, and so I think maybe, yeah, we broke up probably altogether probably 3 times. I think. That's what I remember. And it could be more.
So that going back and forth, where you're in a relationship, she's breaking it off, and then you're back together, and it's quite a roller coaster emotionally.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was very strenuous for both of us. There wasn't a consistency. I think for her, I'm kind of a little. I had no idea I'd be talking so much about this again.
Okay.
um,
But when she broke it off, for good, and that had a really profound effect on you. It was like physiologically, emotionally, it was devastating. How would you describe the effects? I know, like, you had, after I hadn't seen you for a number of years because, you were in London and you were living in other parts of the United States, and you hadn't been back to the East Coast.
yeah.
And so during that time, how did the breakup affect you physiologically and emotionally?
Um, I mean, it was I'm trying to find the right word. I mean, I guess I would, the way I would describe it was it turned my world upside down, sort of psychologically and physiologically. I did, I had experienced some ongoing amount of physical pains all throughout my body for to this day. I still do. A lot of imbalances, just feeling, chest pains, numbness in parts of my limbs.
Mm-hmm.
I went through. I think I was felt slightly, sort of slightly suicidal. I mean, it was pretty bad. It was terrible. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, the grief of a loss can bring all that up. When I saw you in New York, it was towards the end of the summer, and you were describing what you were experiencing, and I looked very quickly into your aura, and what I was seeing really concerned me, and it's comparable to what I see with many people, and in many instances, what happens is it's like we don't possess all the resources or faculties on our own that would enable us to fully process
Yeah.
the pain, all the painful emotions associated with loss of a love there.
Yeah. 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 I agree. Yeah, that definitely hit. It was really. I mean, I'll just like be open. Yeah, I think it's the probably the hardest thing I've ever gone through was this breakup.
Mhm.
It just really just totally rocked my world, and I think that because it was the first time, like you had said, it was the closest relationship that I've ever had with anyone. There was so much of myself that was invested in it, and to have so much of that come into question um, and be rejected in a lot of ways. There was, just so many different emotions, from anger to sadness to grief, horrible grief that I'm still trying to get through and work through.
Mhm.
Um, um, it was surprising to me how hard it was for me to recover, because it's been about 3 years now since I last saw her, and we separated, and I still feel like, I mean, I have a sense that probably it feels like it would normally take some less time if I had more of my faculty, like you said, working for me. Some of it feels like it kind of took longer than maybe it should have, and so yeah, that's definitely
That's fairly
worrying.
commonplace, though. I've gone through breakups where I wasn't all that attached to the other person, and it's like, okay, we're not in a relationship anymore, and it wasn't such a big deal. At least it didn't feel like it.
Yeah.
And other times where I felt very deeply the person that I was seeing, and
Mm-hmm.
it was devastating at the time. Now, in my own training, having trained with a traditional Native American doctor, what's known as a medicine man, a big part of the training involves going alone into the mountains for 4 days and nights,
Yeah.
food and no water. So what I found is by going through the vision quest, I would basically chew up and digest these experiences of loss, and I would get through them much quicker.
Right.
Before I started going on the vision quest, or I'm saying before, there was like in my early 20s, and then there was this gap up into right after I turned 31 where I wasn't going. And there were some times where either I found myself strung out on somebody emotionally who wasn't all that healthy, or went through a breakup, and it just drug on and on and on. But once I started going on vision quests again, then if I went through a relationship and it just wasn't working, if it ended, then I was able to process or digest it that much faster. Now, we had a very, very brief window of opportunity, because you were just passing through New York and then Boston.
Yeah.
So we only got to do 2 sessions, but even in that time, within those 2 sessions, you described, when we spoke before, that there's a lessening of those symptoms, relieving of a lot of the physical and emotional discomfort. How would you describe that?
I would go more, actually, deeper than that. I mean, because the way you're describing it sort of sounds like you're kind of like just letting go of pain, and it was a lot more than just letting go of pain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think like something that you told me that really stuck with me was how I had a lot of defenses up. Well, I'll talk about like I guess those immediate effects. It was really, the things that happened were really kind of like unexpected to me, because I did feel like a softening. I still have like a lot of like a pressure in my heart, like this chakra, as they call it, kind of like feeling this ripped apart feeling, like my heart literally being ripped apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so that felt like it had eased up some.
Easing
but
pain.
yeah, which I had been kind of like a tightness in the chest had kind of relaxed some, but in a way that was really, really very subtle, but very substantial too. Like, because I had felt, through like, crying about it, or that would sometimes, get rid of a lot of that anguish. But there's something about, at least for me, like sometimes it would just be like too self-forced or imposed, and so it would stick. And like the harder I try to get rid of it, like the worse I'd make it.
The harder you try to get rid of the pain? Or?
Yeah. So there was something about just having you work on it for me that just like kind of allowed me to sort of let go, and it was just really kind of like took me over the edge a little bit. It was finally, after like 2.5 years of dealing with kind of disappointment, that it finally helped me to be able to manage it on my own in a way that was more within my control.
Because the level to where it's manageable.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. And what I was going to say was that you had said to me that in the rest of the body work that you had done during those sessions, that there was, a lot of the guarding that I have kind of just built up over along my life in my body. You were able to work through that. So, and so what I felt was more of a connection to my body again as a whole, which helped me to really just get more of a sense of balance for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like something I couldn't have done on my own. Yeah, so it was kind of like it set up the the watermark for me as to where, like, how I feel, how I feel, because when I left walking away, I felt like $1 million. And for a while, and I was like, okay, this is what okay feels like. This is what how like I need to be, when I'm at my best.
Mm-hmm.
And things are just kind of flowing and not kind of like, pushing or pulling at me. And so I just felt this real ease that was, really like very little I've ever experienced. And yeah, it's just kind of like sets the bar for me, always, like for me, that those 2 sessions are for me the bar of like how the work that I need to do to be able to feel kind of that I'm just being, kind of me.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. And the challenge, that, like I said, you were just passing through town for a short time here. I'm in Idaho at this moment. It's the holidays at the time we're recording this video. You're in Los Angeles, so we just had this like little brief window of time where our paths crossed. It depends on a number of factors. There's when someone has gone through a breakup, how deeply, how strongly you were attached. There's past wounding. We're all wounded to some extent. We've gone through things that hurt us in past relationships. Maybe we have, all of us to some extent, have things that carry over from our childhood. And that varies. I mean, there's a whole continuum. Some of us were very much loved and nurtured and well cared for. Some of us were not. And some of us were very much abandoned or abused. And that creates some profoundly deep emotional, psychological wounds. And that will have a huge bearing upon who we attract into our lives, people we find ourselves attracted to, how we attached, and if the relationship does crash and burn at some point, then it's more often we will find ourselves that much more devastated by it. There was a man who had moved up to Boston from Texas to be with a woman he was engaged with at the time. And he showed up in one of my classes. And when I spoke with him about the individual sessions, he said, "Oh, okay, I want to try that." And he did 2 sessions. Now, he had been strung out on his ex-fiancée for a year and a half after she had dumped him. During that time, she had a fling with somebody else, but he couldn't let go. He was in a great deal of pain. Yeah. And so within 2 sessions' time, he was just done with her. I mean, it just broke that attachment, which seriously needed to be broken. He didn't care if he saw her or talked to her or anything. And last I spoke with him, he was folding up. He didn't want to be in the Northeast anyway. He was going to head across country for some period of time and, reassess where he wanted to go from this point in his life. And so, we had the opportunity, we did those 2 sessions. I know from what you're describing, there is a great deal that you are able to work through. There is a tremendous amount of healing in that place. There's more work to do, and I've been in that position myself on quite a number of occasions where I would be going through some difficulty in a relationship, say, and I would go on the vision quest, which is, again, where we go out the 4 days and nights alone into the mountains with food and water. And it would take it down a certain degree. It might take it down like 30, 40, 50%, depending on the relationship, depending on how attached I was. And I'd be going on vision quests, in the spring and in the fall. So, there'd be that gap of time in between. And I would be doing a lot of practice on my own. I developed my own series of intensive meditation practices that these practices help you to take what's happening in your life and the subsequent emotional response, and so you're able to take all that, to digest it, to assimilate it. It does soften a lot of that armoring, that hardening, that all that emotion that tends to accumulate within our bodies and that accumulation takes place when we fail to process our emotions. Doing the practice, what would happen is that would make my body more receptive, more malleable. So when I would go back to the vision quest, what would happen is I would be that much more open, receptive. I'd go in and it would take it down that much more. And so I would actually work with, say, having gone through a breakup or other difficulty in a relationship. And in my case, having gone through a lot of physical, emotional abuse in my childhood, the scars are much deeper. It was much more involved in order to heal those wounds. And the women I would attract at that time in my life years ago, through my 20s and 30s, were reflecting a lot of that early suffering, trauma, in many instances just reenacting it. So there's, so it's like each time I did, I went on the vision quest, it was, I would work through more and more layers of that, and then I'd be doing practice in between. I'd go back to the mountain again. So it's been this whole successive process of working my way down through all these layers, opening up all this woundedness, these parts of myself that were very wounded, dismantling the old structures. Because if we go through a lot of early trauma, it's like a lot of the wounding becomes hardwired within our makeup. It's just just the emotions and the memories are stored in the internal organs and tissues of the body. It's wired into the neurostructure of the brain. It's the brain's biochemistry. There are all these different components. And so we're just imbued with those past traumatic experiences and all those emotions. And not everybody has it that rough. Some of us have a much more difficult or challenging time, at least initially. But what I found is going through this process, it would take it down. There was going down layer by layer, dismantling all that trauma, all that dysfunction that was wired or layered into me. And so in the time that we had to work, we went down to a couple of layers. I'm listening to what you're saying, and obviously there's more work to do. So, it's just hopefully at some point, either I'll make it out to Los Angeles or something, maybe you'll be back on the West Coast and we can go down some more layers and stuff.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah, it's a building process, because when we go through relationships and, especially, when we go through that breakup and it's so devastating, that is reflecting back to us how we are wounded. And losing somebody that we love, it's definitely going to hurt. But there's a profound difference in terms of when we, if we are deeply wounded, that person, say if the relationship breaks up or if they break off the relationship with us, it's going to hurt that much more. It's going to have that much more of a devastating impact physiologically, emotionally. We're not going to be able to function. It's hard to eat or sleep, to do whatever we need to do in our day-to-day lives.
No, that definitely happened to me too. There was, I really had to kind of start from the zero again. And learn how to kind of have a normal day, how to take care of myself, how to sleep and eat. I mean, everything just kind of got turned upside down.
Yeah.
So it was, I think, just, maybe that sort of sense of everything being turned around made it hard for me to kind of get a hold back on life in general, because kind of, I think you're right. I mean, it did really hit some nerves about, feeling, wounded, and those I think I would agree that some of those feelings, they did come up, some really, I think I was, really struck to the core, and and you don't expect that kind of thing, and when it happens, everything that you're normally kind of used to doing, just you just kind of don't lose touch with it, I think, or I did, and it everything just kind of comes into question, and how I guess how the way I was feeling was, how I even operate or live, or my persona, everything was trying to figure out who I was again.
You are as an individual.
Yeah.
Everything. And that's normal because we go through a breakup when we're that deeply attached to somebody, and it just rocks us to the core.
Yeah.
Now, there are a few other things, that add to the challenge, and that, being in this transitional period, and moving to, you lived in a few different cities after London, and then just moving into Los Angeles, which is not the easiest city to get a footing in.
No.
So when we're moving to a new location and we don't have a lot of the supports to fall back on, that adds to our overall sense of vulnerability. So it could be even that much more challenging. It's, when you have multiple stresses, such as having to find a place to live, having to find new employment, and then at the same time you're also dealing with the fallout from the loss of a love, and it's all these things are going to compound one another. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's even in my transition, I'm still kind of dealing with some of that backlash, or kind of the outfall of that what's happened to me before, or the past that I'm coming from. But I guess do the best I can to try to keep moving forward. As as best you can.
I can relate to some of what you're going through because, like I had gone through my apprenticeship with my mentor, and then after a few years, I found myself on my own, and a lot of, say, the traumas of my own childhood and adolescence were coming up, and it was playing out in relationships. And I ended up living in Kansas City for a few years. And, so I was in the midst of this whole process of, healing the wounds from my own traumatic past. And again, much of that was being reflected back to me through the women I would attract during those years, and then moving to Albuquerque and having to start over again, moving to Albuquerque, and then after a few years moving to the East Coast and setting up and starting to work in both New York and Boston. And so the challenges of going into a profession, going into a form of practicing a form of healing art that's actually been around for thousands of years, and yet most people in our modern day society are not at all familiar with it, having to introduce it to people. So there was that challenge, and at the same time, having the difficulty in relationship during those years, and that triggering the reemergence of a lot of early trauma. So I was having to deal on many different levels, in which sounds like you're facing some of that too. What I found though is I just kept taking steps. Time is in the beginning I was lost, I was flailing, I didn't quite know what to do, but there was as I started developing these various practices to help me work through a lot of the difficult emotions that were surfacing, and in doing that, that facilitated a big part of the healing. There were some really gifted, powerful healers I had the opportunity to work with, and each time I did a session that would help me to process more of that grief or loss. And then at the age of 31, then I started going on Vision Quest again. And so there's been this whole successive building process. It's something I think a lot of people in this culture, what I refer to as Wonder Bread culture, I don't think a lot of people grasp it. As a society, the culture, we tend to be very much on the surface of things. Whereas, like, you go in India and China, a lot of the ancient spiritual traditions, and even among Native Americans, there's people who spend a lifetime doing intensive internal practice and working with various very powerful healing processes, like going through, say, working with their native doctors among the Native American tribes, going through the Sundance or Vision Quest processes like that. And going through these processes, what happens is people become much stronger and more resilient. We're all going to face challenges in our lives, whether it be in our work, in our relationships. And when we could utilize these tools and resources, then instead of just contracting and shutting down and internalizing the pain, which the loss and whatever else that we fail to process, we're actually going to be able to take our life experience, such as the loss of love, and all the subsequent emotions attached to it. We're going to be able to digest it, to assimilate it, and it's going to become fuel for growth. We're going to become that much stronger, more resilient, and we're going to go through this whole evolution where we're going to start coming up, and we're going to attract healthier people. And sure, we'll still go through losses along the way at times. I mean, someone comes into our life and we walk along together for a certain period of time, and maybe we or they, just grow in different ways. Our needs change, and so that relationship no longer continues. But we can utilize these processes, and instead of contracting, shutting down, we grow, we evolve. And so there's a deepening, there's an enriching, and we become more. There's a building. We're deepening our, not in a religious sense, but we all have this. At some level, we're all connected to the source or the higher power, and so within the ancient Taoist traditions, among the Native Americans, other ancient esoteric traditions, there's much of this is about being fully present here in this physical world, living life, but at the same time deepening one's connection to the source, to the higher power, so that you're continually building, you're growing, you're becoming stronger as an individual, and you're living more fully. Yeah. Anything that you'd like to add before we wrap this up here?
Not really. I mean, I think my experience working together with you has been really much a great, reminder about, everything that you've just said about how it's a process of being able to, for the things that happen to you to complement, our experiences, and I, it's, working with you has been a really great kind of reminder for me of that journey and being able to live a satisfying and fulfilling life instead of kind of being at odds with the things that happen. And I find um, the practices too to also be really great um, just tools to be able to kind of get back on track, or and to
Get
be
your
able to live.
mind back on track. Get your life
Yeah,
on track.
yeah. I mean, ultimately, that's where we all want to be. It's kind of in harmony. And so, yeah, I hope it's been really good. My experience, in um, discovering the work that you do, and it's been, it's helped me kind of get a bigger understanding of, how things kind of, it just kind of almost magnifies the beauty of how kind of life happens for all of us. And so it's just kind of like a nice kind of addition to what is already available for everyone. And,
Yeah.
it's been a good, really good, a good ride. It's been a lot of fun. So I look forward to doing some more with you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. We'll go ahead and wrap up today, and we'll just say bye to those who
Okay.
are viewing, and though and we may have some more conversations down the road, on video. But bye for now, everyone.